Tomorrow is Labor Day, the unofficial final day of the summer, and a day off of work for many of us. If you're like me, Labor Day usually gets eaten up pretty quickly. If I actually take it off from work, then it ends up as a catch-up day for errands. So I want to share a little bit of the history of the holiday to hopefully inspire all of us to actually go out and celebrate it. The first Labor Day celebration was in 1882 in New York City. The first one was not a federal or even a local holiday. It was actually a large-scale strike. In the 1800s, unions were actually very small and didn't cover many workers. The organizations were weak and they were sort of siloed and separated. But the Central Labor Union was working to change that by bringing those smaller unions together to get to know each other. So the organizers of the first Labor Day were interested in creating an event that brought different types of workers to meet each other and to spend time together for a common day. To create the opportunity, they realized that there was no holiday to fit the need, so they decided to create a one-day temporary strike in New York City. All striking workers were expected to march in a parade and then eat and drink at a giant picnic afterwards. It fascinates me how the culture of holidays gets created. I thought we just had parades and picnics because it was the end of summer. But both with that initial strike and the state and federally sanctioned holidays, it was specified. You will have parades and you will have picnics with each other. On that first Labor Day in New York in 1882, 10,000 people marched and met each other. At that time, the average American worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. I'm going to say that again. 12-hour days, 6 days a week on average. That means a whole lot of people worked a whole lot more. By 1890, that figure dropped to spending an average of 60 hours per week in a factory. It took until 1919 to pass the 8-hour workday. That's actually a tremendous amount of progress made by labor organizers in 34 years. The difference between 12-hour workdays and 8-hour workdays provides the opportunity for people to do something besides work. It gives people the opportunity to actually live meaningful lives. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the Friday night Shabbat service at Temple Beth El in Aliso Viejo. They were installing a new rabbi, so several local faith leaders were there to participate in the service. It was nice. I hadn't been to a full Shabbat service before. I had been to people's homes on Friday night where they light candles and say a blessing over the wine. But this was a full-on community worship service. It's a great way to start the weekend. If you're familiar with the idea of Shabbat, or as Christians recognize it, Sabbath, you know that it's a time for rest. It's a time of reflection. It's based on the idea that God created things and saw that they were good and then took a rest. Therefore, on this day, people should do the same. Take a rest and reflect on the goodness. So as the rabbi invited us into this time of Shabbat, he said that Friday night was the time for us to enjoy being human beings. Most of the week, we're busy in our work and chores and volunteer tasks. Most of the week, we're human doings. But in this special time, we transition for a while from human doings into human beings. That's what I want to talk about today. Seeing ourselves and those around us as human beings rather than human doings. Not about one special day of the week, though. It's a concern about the full week and the full life. In the United States, we share a pretty disturbing history of treating people as a means of production. Some of that history is much more recent than we would like to think. Last month, when I was on vacation for a couple of weeks, I had the opportunity to visit Montgomery, Alabama. Most of us know Montgomery as a cornerstone of the civil rights movement. I learned on my trip, though, that long before that, it was actually a central hub for the slave trade in that region. Today, Montgomery is home to two newer landmarks, the Lynching Memorial and the Legacy Museum. The Lynching Memorial is what it sounds like. It's a memorial for the people of African descent who were lynched in the United States. It's not for the faint of heart. It names more than 4,400 people who were lynched after the end of slavery. And they date as late as 1950, not so terribly long ago. Slavery is obviously a horrifying chapter of our past, but for me, the more sobering piece of visiting this museum was coming to terms with how we still treat people as a means to economic ends. The trail from slavery to the prison industrial complex is way more long and elaborate than I can explain here. I think a lot of you have read up on it. But being there at the museum just made it an undeniable reality for me. We also have an ability to see people as disposable in a more local way. A couple of my friends, my closest friends actually, live in downtown Los Angeles. They've lived there for a few years. They love the restaurants and the bars, and it's close to the freeway, and it's in between both of their jobs. The challenge for them is the huge number of people who live there without homes. It's not the people themselves that bother them. What bothers them is the daily reminder of our unspoken policy for dealing with homeless people. As my friend put it, our policy for homelessness is slow euthanasia by neglect. Sobering, isn't it? That's how we deal with the problem. I promise the rest of this sermon isn't as grim. I wanted to mention those two realities, though, as a reminder of what's at stake when we see human beings as human doings. If we value people by what they contribute to the economy rather than recognize their inherent worth and dignity, we become capable of horrific acts. We've got to get beyond seeing people as dollars and cents. I want to share my theory of why I think we judge people based on their economic status. It's actually not as bad as it sounds. I don't think we judge people based on wealth because we're greedy and materialistic. I think we judge people because we need to believe that the world is fair. Hear me out. Occasionally, I'm asked what my favorite piece of scripture is, As a good Unitarian minister, my answer is obscure. I tell them it's Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament. You're probably at least familiar with the passage from Ecclesiastes from the Birds song, turn, turn, turn. There's a season for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to reap, a time to sow, and so on and so on. It's actually a good encapsulation of what that book is about. It basically says that life isn't fair. Good things happen to bad people, and some terrible things happen to really good people. With the passage of time, you're likely to see a good measure of both good luck and bad luck. Wringing your hands over it isn't going to solve anything, so get on with your life. The book of Ecclesiastes stands out because it goes against what the vast majority of religion teaches, especially in the Abrahamic faiths. For the most part, religion teaches us that in the end it all gets worked out, either through karma or God or some other mechanism that makes life, this life, or the next life, fair. One version you've probably heard of is the prosperity gospel. Tens of millions of Christians embrace this gospel. It's basically the belief that God provides material wealth for those that he favors. Pray harder, and you'll be blessed with more income. Be good, and you'll be blessed accordingly. It's easy to point fingers and dismiss such a belief system. But even without a church that preaches a prosperity gospel, we still want to believe that the world is fair. We want to believe that our work will be rewarded and that we can be safe if we try. Here's a little secret, though. Life isn't in our control. We're born to a random family, of a random race, of a random class. And along the way, some pretty random opportunities and challenges come across our path. We may stumble into educational opportunities or job opportunities that are far beyond what could have been expected. We may encounter some physically or emotionally disabling tragedy along the way. That amount of chaos is really scary. In the face of uncertainty, we want to believe that we got where we are because we're good people. We want to believe that we'll stay where we are if we keep on track. So it's easier and slightly more comfortable to look down our nose a little bit than it is to deal honestly with the possibility that we could very, very easily be in the other person's shoes. I believe that we judge others based on their wealth because we really want the world to be fair and controllable. We all, and I include myself in this, we all are called to let go of the illusion that we have earned this life that we are living, that we're somehow different from anyone else. We're called to disabuse ourselves of the idea that people's wealth has anything to do with their worth. There's a freedom to be found in that transition. When we realize that everyone's journey is different, everyone has obstacles and unearned advantages. then the only marker of success is personal growth, personal improvement, our own goals. I don't often use sports metaphors in my preaching, but this is one that I'm actually very familiar with. Not many of you know that I was on the swim team in high school. I was actually quite good. At least a couple of years I competed at the state level and was in the top 10 in my senior year. I enjoyed swimming, partly because of the nature of the competition. We've all seen at least races on the Olympics, right? You see what looks like people racing against each other in the pool. To some extent, that's what's happening. In the Olympics, of course, people are racing for medals or a win for their country. But much, much more often in the sport, swimmers are racing against themselves. They're racing to beat their own best times. It occurs to me that we might look at work satisfaction and professional success in a similar way. Maybe if we focus less on the podium and the handing out of medals, we can find pride in our successes and our growth. One of the other reasons that being on a swim team was pretty cool was that not everyone was in the top tier. Not everyone is going to beat the other team in a particular event. But if you know your teammates, you know what their individual goals are. You can cheer for their success, not for being the fastest person in the pool, but for swimming faster than they ever have before. Often before a meet, our coach would tell us, John is trying to beat a specific time, or Emily is trying to qualify for regional competitions. And we would cheer for them, not based on who was in the lane next to them, but based on how they were achieving their own goals. So what if we got to know our teammates better? What if we celebrated the individual victories and achievement? What if we acknowledged effort and growth instead of gold, silver, and bronze? There's one more option for celebrating our work that I want to mention. That is right livelihood according to the Buddhist tradition. In Buddhism, the journey toward a satisfying life basically has 8 paths to pay attention to. One of those 8 paths is right livelihood. Traditionally, that meant that you shouldn't contribute to the suffering of others. You shouldn't be a warrior, and you shouldn't be involved in slaughtering animals. Remember, this is Buddhism. Our economic web today is way more complex than the Buddha ever could have imagined, and our contributing to the suffering of others in our livelihood. But today, Buddhist scholars suggest a couple of guideposts. One is about honesty. If your work requires intentionally deceiving people, be very, very careful. Dishonesty is a slippery slope. And those little lies that may be encouraged in the workplace can whittle away our relationship with truth. More generally, Buddhist scholars talk about how much time we spend at work. If we're intentional about it, it can be a great opportunity for growth. That may be through our commitment to integrity and truth-telling. It may be through our commitment to treat others with compassion. It may be through cultivating patience and mindfully accepting the things that are truly outside of our control. but our livelihood is an opportunity not just to earn, but to grow. Pride in our work can be about so much more than paychecks or titles that come with it. Pride in our work can be an opportunity to be better human beings. And I think the more we see ourselves as human beings, the less likely we are to see others as human doings. Amen.